What do you think about the notion that that would not have appeased him? You know, that the hungry fox is not sated by one chicken. And that really what he wants is Ukraine to be part of Russia. He wants to eat it. He wants to swallow it.
Yeah.
And what he's angry about is that Ukraine, which is an independent country, doesn't want that. They actually have grown closer to the West. They're pro-democracy, and they've found the Western way of life to be appealing. And they've kind of turned the cold shoulder to him, leaving him, forgive my pedestrian analogies, but he's sort of like the boyfriend who got dumped, who's like, but I still want to be with you. And Ukraine's looking over at us like, well, I kind of like this one now. This is actually more attractive to me. And he's behaving badly, to take it down to the very basic analogy one can do.
Sure. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. But even there, what you just described, you start to see the outlines of a possible negotiated settlement. Just because, Putin doesn't get everything that he wants, maybe he gets what he needs and some of what he wants. And maybe Ukraine gets what they need and some of what they want. Nobody's going to be happy. But by entering into a serious negotiation process, long before we got to this point, there may have been an outline of a settlement where Ukraine got political independence and it was free to turn toward Europe and to make trade deals with the EU. But it sacrificed some of its territory to do that. And there was an exchange there and a back and forth. And look, we can be tough with Putin, and we could have been tough with Putin about this and said, look, you'll get Crimea, and maybe you'll get these areas in eastern Ukraine as well. Mm-hmm. And in exchange for that, you relinquish any claim to have influence over Ukraine or keep Ukraine in your orbit, and they are free to go their way. The outlines of a settlement, you can see if anyone in the West had taken that seriously, and had anyone had taken seriously Russia's view of the situation. And I don't think they did, which instead you got this sort of feckless and inconsistent U.S. policy where, the Obama administration wouldn't arm the Ukrainians, and the Trump administration did. And then the Biden administration, eased up sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We've had a strategic mess in our approach to this situation and our approach to Russia over the past decades. And I think all of that has contributed to the war now. That's not to say the United States is responsible for the war. Putin is, but it is to say that the war represents a strategic failure on the part of the United States.
Mm-hmm. If we had done that, what would have stopped his ire once what was left of Ukraine, which would still be the bulk of Ukraine, said, now we're going to join NATO. Now we want to be part of the EU, and we're going to join NATO.
Well, part of that negotiation in offering territory for independence could have been some security guarantee to Ukraine. I doubt Ukraine would have agreed of their own volition to relinquish significant amounts of territory without some sort of security guarantees for the West, and that could have been a part of it. It's no use, though, the Russia's concerns about NATO. I often hear in response, sort of from Western media, it's like, well, NATO is a defensive treaty. We're not a threat to Russia. It's just a sort of propaganda that Putin is saying that NATO is a threat to Russia. Putin does see NATO as a threat to Russia. Whether or not NATO really is a threat to Russia is almost beside the point. And so we have to come up with a diplomatic and strategic approach that takes that into account and tries to mitigate Russian fears about NATO. And instead of saying, well, Putin is never going to accept a Ukraine that's oriented toward Europe, we should have tried to find a way in which Russia could accept a reduced Ukraine that may be oriented toward Europe in exchange for something very valuable that we would all agree Russia could keep forever, like Crimea and the Donbass and maybe some other areas. But I don't think that these discussions or even this way of thinking ever entered into the calculus in Washington because we don't have very serious people who are in charge of U.S. foreign policy, and we haven't for some time.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.